what we're hearing in these confirmation hearings from some of these nominees. And I ask you, an accomplished, decorated lawyer and attorney, uh, the Attorney General nomination of Pam Bondi. Let's start there because that would be appropriate with you. What have you heard and what you've read and seen from Pam Bondi? Is there anything that surprised you, either for the better or the worse?
Well, I'm not really that encouraged. She's, sort of a typical, uh, what you expect kind of from Trump. She's not Matt Gaetz, um, but she is someone who seems to be totally under his thumb, under his sway. She was the Attorney General of the state of Florida. She was going to invest in, she was going to investigate the Trump school, that turned out to be this flim flam school of Trump's, where he had to pay $25 million in fines. And the question was, what states were going to investigate it? Was Florida going to be one of the ones that would investigate Trump University? She took a large campaign donation. She backed off. She seemed to be currying favor with him when she was in public office. The idea of having someone who's the head of the Department of Justice, who has a record of basically currying favor with very rich, powerful people who are under prospect of prosecution. That's, of course, not what we want in the rule of law. But I guess about all you can say about Bondi is that, she could have been worse. It could be Gates. I could think of some other people. Remember, he had an acting attorney general. He had that fellow Jeffrey Clark. So that is my praise for her, my dim praise of her, that she's not Matt Gaetz. She's not Jeffrey Clark.
Right. I somebody yesterday I heard on the radio saying it wouldn't have made a difference if it was Pam Bondi or Matt Gaetz, and
That's not true.
and
That's
I
not
don't
true.
think that's true, and I don't think that's true either. But they were making a sort of a cerebral argument as to why that Bondi is somebody who has always and continued in places where she could actually give positive influence to Donald Trump, has always done that, has always deferred to that, has always protected him, has always been a denier of the election of 2020. And the argument was that Gaetz has not always done that, but also doesn't have that history with Trump, only as a member of Congress and liking him and supporting him, but also being from the first district of Florida, where that is something that just about everybody does. So, but there is a difference, right? There's definitely a difference.
My take on the difference between her and him, she's sort of an institutionalist. She's run for office. She held a serious job. Not being from like the most right wing congressional district, but she had a serious job where she held statewide office. She had a lot of responsibilities to follow the rule of law. I'm very dim on how she treated Trump and that she gave favoritism to Trump. But I think in general, she's someone who didn't want to, who was cautious, who was a careful state elected prosecutor, I think, for a couple of terms. Gaetz, I had the feeling, would do things, even if he knew he was going to get caught, even if they were going to look outrageous in the annals of history, he would do them. You know what I mean? He was one of
Yeah.
those people who wanted to, make a splash, who wanted to show that he was the defier. And he would railroad somebody, and the whole world would knew that he was railroading them, and it was because of their political purposes, and there'd be documents to prove that the person was being railroaded. There'd be a good motion for selective prosecutions that, like, a Republican appointed judge would take seriously. And Gates was the sort of person who would ruin someone's life with that. I don't think that Bondi would do anything like that. But I think when push comes to shove, there's a huge investigation of Elon Musk's company. There's a huge investigation of somebody who's a loyalist of Trump, that she's a loyalist of Trump. And so, of course, I'm queasy about it. This is what the Democrats said. They said this about Holder. They said that, Holder wasn't going to really zealously represent somebody who was in the tank with Obama. I didn't believe it in those situations. I thought Holder was trying to do his job fairly. And I may be pleasantly surprised that she performs her duty fairly. But I think she has a goal of being perceived as performing it fairly, with the soft spot when it comes to Trump and the Trump loyalists. I think
Right.
Gates, as I say, would have been a defier. He would have been a performance artist. It would have been a clown show. And to have someone like that as the head of DOJ or head of the FBI, which is Kash Patel, that's the one that everyone's horrified about. The Bondi hearings were interesting because they said, would you rein in Kash Patel? You wouldn't do things like Kash Patel would do. And so one of the Republicans, to try to defend Bondi, said, well, you see, they're not really upset about you. They're upset about Kash Patel. So people are mildly upset about Bondi, and they're outrageously upset about Kash Patel, who has a stated record that he wants to, he's got a book, I think, called Government Gangsters. He's going to show who all the government gangsters are. What he calls government gangsters are office holders who happen to be of the other party. So it's very terrifying. And of course, they're, quote, enemies of Trump. People like, Senator Adam Schiff, who as a Congress member performed his duty and excellently to present the impeachment case to the Senate against Trump. That's a patriot. Either side, either side of the aisle should see that as being a patriot, not at all how Kash Patel sees it.
Yeah, and David, so you brought up some things that I want to ask about. Kash Patel could still have a rough road, especially as we've seen what looks like these people sailing through. And, this is when it's most intense, right? In these confirmation hearings, we saw it with Brett Kavanaugh most recently. We see it with these, with the new administration coming in, and then it ends. And then these people, wake up one morning and they go to work at the Justice Department or at the Supreme Court or what have you. And we judge them on the work ahead, not what they've done behind. What kind of recourse is there to an attorney general run amok? We know we don't have that with the Supreme Court, but is there is there something that will get people upset about an attorney general enough? I mean, I know Watergate aside, where we saw that happen, but is there something that can happen here?
No, I don't really think so. I think an attorney general has a huge amount of power. People have sort of this view of the attorney general from the special prosecutor cases. I mean, that's what especially viewers of this show, people who are sort of legal, political aficionados have been watching, is obviously the special prosecutor, Jack Smith. But the reality of what the Department of Justice does, I don't want to bore people, but if you just give me 1 minute on this. So
no, you're not boring anybody. I think this is fascinating stuff.
There are 94 U.S. attorneys around the country. Basically, the country is divided geographically into 94 districts. And they always have these strange names because it's not how we tend to think of our geography. There's the Southern District of New York. That's Manhattan and the Bronx, Westchester. There's the Eastern District of New York. That's Brooklyn, Queens, and Long Island. There's the Central District of California. We don't think of ourselves as central. People always think, oh, so you were a prosecutor out there in Fresno? No, the Central District of California is the hugest one in the country. It's bigger than either New York district. But we're in central over here. And then, the Bay Area is northern. And then San Diego, because it's south of us, is southern. So there are these 94 districts around the country. And then each one has a presidentially appointed U.S. attorney. Now, they're all going to leave probably in the next week. Some of them who may be slow to leave may get fired every 4 years or so, every 8 years. We have some controversy about some U.S. attorney who doesn't leave. And the U.S. attorney can stay on if the U.S. attorney isn't fired. And there are some famous people who did that, like the one in Delaware, who stayed on. He was, quote, left over from Trump. Biden kept him on for the appearance of fairness. And he's the one who right now, Weiss, is prosecuting the Biden group, including a fellow, this informant who blew up and turned out not to be the smoking gun, but turned out to be a lying gun. He just got sentenced to about 5 or 6 years here in the Central District of California. The prosecutor on his case was Weiss, left over from Trump the first time around. But generally speaking, they all go. I got my nice little invitation to go to the going away party of our U.S. attorney out here, which will be next Thursday. And probably by the end of next week, pretty much all of the U.S. attorneys, all 94, will be gone. And then there'll be somebody from, quote, the deep state, as Trump would say it, who's going to run those offices. And I don't think it's going to make very much difference in how the offices run. And that's normally somebody who's either been brought in by the politically appointed U.S. attorney, or it's someone who's worked their way up in the ranks to be the chief assistant in the office. So what's going to happen until all of those U.S. attorneys are confirmed around the country is that those offices are going to be run basically by a careerist, someone who I think we can all trust to make good decisions. And then, of course, to become a U.S. attorney, you do have to get by the Judiciary Committee, which Adam Schiff is on now, and some very, very able Democrats are on now. But of course, they don't have the votes. If every Democrat votes no and every Republican on the Judiciary Committee votes yes, they advance that candidate, including for U.S. attorney around the country. up to the full House, the full Senate, and of course the Senate's 53-47. So expect confirmation. And then just one last thing is that within justice itself, it's not just these 94 U.S. attorneys around the country. They have divisions. One of them is called the criminal division. And they do these big cases in Washington, and they exercise some supervisorial control over the 94 U.S. attorneys and agencies, and they're called the criminal division. They're in Washington in Main Justice. There's a civil division. So like the medical abortion pill, that was a huge civil case, suing over some of these things like in Baltimore where they destroyed the bridge, and then the government went and sued. That's the civil division. They're a big deal. There's a tax division, which people heard about because Biden met with the head of the tax division. On my cases, I do a lot of these federal criminal income tax cases. I meet with, when it's worthwhile, I meet with the tax division. They're another agency in Washington, D.C. And then there's kind of lands, natural resources, and of course there's civil rights. That's the group that goes around the country and brings these cases about police, different police forces, whether they're violating the civil rights laws of the country. You hear about them a lot. They're very controversial. The police departments generally scream and yell, say they don't need this kind of supervision. And here comes the civil rights from Washington. So that's Washington, D.C. That's the 94 U.S. attorneys around the country. And then there's a very small structure above all of them, who's the attorney general, the deputy attorney general, and then basically the people who run these divisions. The person who runs criminal cases, the person who runs civil cases. It's not a hands-on kind of running of them. But what you worry about is that when it's something like a politician, that goes way up very fast. And so they can open up an investigation or approve the prosecution of a politician. And of course, we always think about, oh my God, and it seems to happen more with the Republicans, Michael, that they go after their political enemies. The joke about the Democrats is they go after their political friends. And so when Carter was in power and he had the Abscam investigation, I think he picked 6 Democratic Congress members and only 1 Republican. So it's like, that's great, Jimmy. That's great, Jimmy. But of course, that was Jimmy Carter. If 7 of them were guilty, 7 of them were going to be charged. And if 6 of them were Democrats, well, so be it. That was the rule of law. And if you look at under Biden, for instance, I don't think you could really say that there's been any, this weaponization of the Department of Justice is total garbage. It's total nonsense. It's all Trump's rhetoric that he doesn't like the fact that he was righteously prosecuted in 2 very good cases that he managed to delay, and now they won't see the light of day. If you look at the, quote, weaponization of the Department of Justice against Republicans, no. Who are the Republicans? Who are the Republicans in trouble? Very few. Who are the Democrats in trouble under this so-called Democratic weaponization of the Department of Justice? The mayor of New York City is under indictment. Whatever he likes to say right now that somehow he was targeted, he's a Democrat. He's a Democratic office holder. Do I believe that he got picked because he gave him a hard time about they should pay more for the bus loads of immigrants that were going into New York? No, I don't believe it. I'm a criminal defense attorney, but at least right now, I don't believe it. I think that he was righteously selected for prosecution because he's way too close to a lot of influence peddlers, and he sold his influence. That's what I believe. That's what the allegations are. He's a Democrat. Look all around the country. You look at Los Angeles, the Democratic Attorney General, the Democratic U.S. Attorney who's going to leave this next week. Who did he charge out here? He charged a bunch of Democratic office holders, and the reason he charged Democratic office holders is they were doing corrupt things. They were taking money in exchange for influence. They were approving zoning changes because people were paying them off. They were taking trips to Las Vegas that were part of being bribed. And those people are in prison right now. And guess what? They're Democrats. So what you worry about, though, is that is not this whole projection with Trump, that the projection is, yes, there could be political persecution by the attorney general. Yes, there very much could be. And there hasn't been by Biden. And we're really worried that it's another projection by Trump, because that's what Trump figures. My God, without much power and without guardrails, that's what I do. I try to put all my enemies in jail. They say bad things about me. I want to see them in prison.
Okay, I want to ask you a conjecture question. We have 4 more days of the Biden presidency, basically. Do you expect some blanket pardons of people, like preemptive pardons of people who may be targets? You brought up Senator Schiff, but there are others out there. Do you expect that to come down in the next several days?
Well, I'm running this great streak of predictions that have come out. And I always say I'm going to risk it. And then I pretty much predicted TikTok in the U.S. Supreme Court, how I think that's going to come out. Almost all the commentators agreed with me after they heard the argument. And of course, that they let Trump go ahead and be sentenced in the state court in New York. I predicted that the U.S. Supreme Court would allow that. So I'm going to now probably blow my streak by saying that I do believe Biden is going to issue some preemptive pardons. These are the kinds of pardons that President Ford issued for President Nixon. Nixon hadn't been charged with anything, and yet preemptively, he gave him a pardon. So if they started to criminally investigate Nixon or bandy about, the FBI did, an investigation of him that would end up in him being in prison, he could say, no, I have a pardon. I have a pardon. It's filed. It's official. You have to leave me alone because I've been pardoned. And I think that Biden is going to give some of these people that are on the known enemies list of Trump and Patel, I think he's going to give them preemptive pardons. And I think, Michael, what he's going to say is this. This is what I would do. And suppose he gave his farewell address, but there's no stopping him doing this if he wants to do it. Show the clip of Trump saying, I want to see Lynn Cheney in front of a firing squad. Show Patel saying, I'm going to go after people who are political enemies of Trump's. Don't take my word for it. Biden would say, here's the clip. Here's the specific threat. The remedy for this is to not have the person spend $1 million because Trump and Patel have made clear they will not observe the rule of law. I will give them something so they don't need to hire a lawyer. They don't need to be financially devastated by the investigation that can be opened of them. And I think he will give preemptive pardons to certain key people who Trump has made clear he wants to ruin their life. He can't convict them of anything. Lynn Cheney hasn't done anything wrong whatsoever. It's literally trumped up what he's talking about. But I think that not all these people are rich. Not all these people have super rich friends like Trump does. Some of them have indicated, Michael, that they don't want a pardon. Senator Schiff is one who said, I don't want a pardon. Senator Schiff also is someone who can tap into, if he needs to, a very large fundraising effort to make sure he doesn't have to mortgage his house in order to pay his legal bill. But you can think of a dozen or 2 dozen people on that list of people specified by Trump that he would ruin their life economically, even though at the end of the day, he and Patel wouldn't prove them guilty of anything. And let me just go to Patel really quickly. The reason that the FBI is so scary, there's all these FBI agents around the country in different offices like the U.S. Attorney's offices. And then there's all of these people in the main FBI building, that very ugly building in Washington, D.C.
Right. Still named for J. Edgar Hoover, by the way.
Astonishing. So when the name changes, they can't call it Fort Bragg anymore, but they can call that building J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, he has a terrible record. He is like, there's like civil rights. You look up civil rights and there's a big red X right across it. When it goes anywhere near J. Edgar Hoover. I mean, just a terrible record of violating civil liberties, not starting with Martin Luther King Jr., but one of the worst examples of his violating civil rights was Martin Luther King. And of course, violating the wiretap laws and you name it, J. Edgar Hoover violated. But my point is that they can start an investigation on very flimsy grounds. Why the FBI opens an investigation of one person and not another person is so much discretion. And we all trust that, it's not going to happen to you and me because we live in a country of the rule of law. Why on earth would they do that? We're not a part of any criminal organization. There's no there that they're likely to get. But if somebody with terrible judgment at the FBI decides to do that, there are very little constraints on that. And that alone, if you start to hear that drumbeat that those kinds of things are going on, you start to spend a lot of money on a criminal defense attorney like me or somebody else, and it's out of your pocket. And it can be financially ruinous, of course, reputations. People think you're under FBI investigation. How many people in America, now, of course, there's an exception now with Trump and Patel, but most people think, wow, the guy's being investigated by the FBI. He must have done something wrong. That is unfortunately human nature, even though we have the presumption of innocence. So this is very, very scary. The Patel thing is very, very scary. And the last thing was that the job was not open. They had to oust the 10-year term guy. And of course, this is the end of the 10-year term. The Democrats will be seen as the biggest milquetoast of all time if once they get power back, and I think it'll be in 4 years. It has to be a job that goes with the president now. The director of the FBI has to be If the Democrats are in, it's a Democrat, and then when the Republicans come to power, they put their Republican director in there. But Biden went for that farce that it really was a 10-year term, and neither time did Trump and the Republicans respect that it's a 10-year term. They ousted Comey during his 10-year term, and now they've ousted Wray, another Republican, during his 10-year term. And last thing on the FBI, there has never been a Democratic head of the FBI. You can look it up. From J. Edgar Hoover right on down, there's never been a Democratic head of the FBI director.
No, that's incredible. I believe you, and I didn't know that. And I heard people talk about a 5-year term, so that it would extend past and seem less political past a presidential term.
Oh, Michael, this drives me crazy too, because Biden is such an institutionalist. He's such a good guy that he bought into that, and so he left a lot of these inspectors general in office. Okay, Trump, as soon as they do something he doesn't like, they're going to be one head after the other is going to be chopped off if he doesn't just chop them all off right now, just because why should I be stuck with these people? They're not my Mar-a-Lago people. They're all Biden people. They're all appointed by Biden, which, as you say, was exactly the idea. But if you remember, through this amazing concatenation of circumstances, one chance in 5 million, this incredibly intensive IRS audit was done on both Comey and the guy right under it, Andrew Adam.
McCabe,
right. They got rid of his pension like the day before it vested. He had to sue to get it back. They did everything to ruin that guy's life. Those guys, you won't believe the coincidence. Both of those, one chance in 5 million, got picked by the IRS commissioner appointed by Trump for this incredibly intensive IRS audit, okay? And of course, the inspector general looked at it because it sure looked anomalous on the face of it, and he was someone from Bush, right? Or he's someone from Trump. I'm sorry. He was someone left over from Trump. And Biden says he's decided there was no monkey business, so there must have been no monkey business. Right. You and I are looking at that and saying, wow, Biden, you really do believe in this idea of these overlapping terms. And he was like, well, and I kept saying, who is this inspector general? I wasn't impressed with this report or what he had to say or anything like that. And then I saw the guys from Trump. I saw that this exonerated what Trump's IRS commissioner had done. By the way, I cannot making this stuff up. Trump's IRS commissioner lives in one of his properties.
It's so good. It's so good. Just you can't make that up. I don't know what your time is like. I don't want to let you go without talking to you about Jack Smith very briefly and what becomes of what we know now. If it's nothing, it's depressing to a lot of people. I know Arizona has requested that material. I don't know if they're going to get it. The Attorney General there has requested it. Tell me what you think is right or what's reasonable, what will happen.
Well, I'm sure I'm going to have a lot of controversy over this, and this is just, of course, like everything I say, just my personal opinion. But my personal opinion is that no state can really stand up to a sitting president. That's why I always thought that if Trump got reelected, one way or the other, that Atlanta case is going nowhere. And the New York case got done before he became a sitting president, so we didn't have that problem in New York. Yes. But you take and so the idea of a really vigorous prosecution of the sitting president of the United States by Arizona, I just don't see it. I think the chances for retaliation are so vast. I mean, even California right now, we want to stand up against some of these awful things that Trump has announced he's going to do. But we need money so bad. We've had such a disaster out here and everything else. And the reality, at some point, people will say, you know what, if we're prosecuting Trump for something he did some years ago, they have to let it go because we need billions and billions of dollars, and Trump is in control. That's not the way the world ought to be.
I will say that there are 16 defendants in the Arizona case. So there's Mark Meadows and others. And those are the types of people that take the fall for a sitting president, as we've seen in Watergate, as we probably saw in Travelgate, et cetera, Whitewater. But do you think that the case is weakened by Trump not being part of it, or in a way strengthened?
Well, I think it's certainly strengthened, Michael, in the sense that it would continue. But I think that the administration will do a lot of things. I mean, Trump wants to show loyalty. In this instance, they say loyalty is always a one-way street with Trump until it is no longer convenient for Trump. But it is convenient for Trump to show loyalty for those people and to really make those people's lives difficult in Arizona. And I don't think you can, gainsay the possibility that people who are trying to do their jobs down in Arizona in state court will be prosecuted federally. Someone's tax audit starts, and one of the people trying to get Trump's Confederates down there in Arizona has a federal investigation, has a federal tax audit. And before you know it, it's like, okay, you want to play chicken with the president of the United States and all the federal agencies. And so I think that there is just a real tendency. And, I think, let me just say this about the U.S. Supreme Court decision, which I didn't agree with the presidential immunity. But I think one thing that kind of brought it on, and no one did anything wrong. I understand everybody's emotions and intellectual analysis of it. But and Mark was very sensitive to this too, and I think he probably took some criticism. But can 50 states really go after a former president of the United States? To me, it wasn't that troubling that the Department of Justice and Jack Smith, with all of the constraints on him and all the rules that he had to follow, and him being just such an impressive person intellectually and just everything about him, that was one thing to have him prosecuting former president of the United States. But to have 50 different states, right, mad at a former president, maybe over politics, be able to prosecute him, that disturbed the U.S. Supreme Court. I think it just did. They said, unless the president has presidential immunity from criminal prosecution, how do we stop 50 different states and all the different prosecutors in them from making the life of a former president a mess? And you can imagine it right now that Biden's leaving office. Some county in Texas goes after Biden without that presidential immunity ruling, and it didn't need to be nearly as broad as it was. But without that presidential immunity ruling being out there, what does stop some county in Texas saying that, he conspired to bring illegal aliens into their county and Biden should be prosecuted? Right. Well, the answer right now is that unbelievably, in my opinion, overbroad presidential immunity. But I think that was kind of part of the yin and yang that ended up producing that really outrageous decision. Although, Michael, one thing I said about it, there was a precedent sitting out there, and the left acted like it didn't exist, and the right, for their own reasons, didn't report it right. And I kept saying to people, the president, a former president, Michael, is immune from civil proceedings. There was a famous case called Fitzgerald v. Nixon. And this Fitzgerald, Nixon ruined his life. He drummed him out of the government. Fitzgerald had a totally righteous claim against Nixon. Nixon was the ex-president, and the Supreme Court ruled 5-4 that there was no civil liability by a former president. And I thought, my God, if a civil case can't be brought against a former president, even by someone who seems to have a very righteous claim, can a criminal prosecution be brought? And so I always thought it was a closer question whether we were going to have the presidential immunity case saying that former presidents were immune from criminal prosecution. I always thought it was more likely that the Supreme Court was going to do it, and it shouldn't be just dismissed, intellectually, legally. It shouldn't be dismissed as, oh, there's no basis for this at all. This would be out of left field. What they had to do, what they did do, was extend Fitzgerald into the Trump case by just saying that, yes, for the same reasons that there ought to be immunity from civil cases, yes, there's an immunity for a former president for criminal cases, and especially since there were indeed brewing around the country these criminal cases in DA's offices and maybe in attorney general's offices in all these states, that we have 50 of them. I thought that case was unfortunately likely to come out that way. I didn't think they were going to go quite that far, that you couldn't even comment on anything that happened. This idea that you can't even bring into court or discuss at all that the president told some guy who was number 7 in the Department of Justice, I'm going to vault you over the other guys. I'm going to throw them out. I'm going to make you the acting attorney general, but you have to submit a memo that says there's fraud in Georgia, even though there is no fraud in Georgia. Just put out the memo as acting attorney general, and I'll have my Republican congressional hench people take it from there. I thought that shouldn't be immune, but there were some hard lines to draw there. So I think, and let me just say my last thing about Jack Smith, is that I thought he was a wonderful public servant. I think that his record was almost faultless. I think he made one tactical mistake, which was to bring the Mar-a-Lago case, as it's been called. It was actually the taking of documents from the White House without authorization and then lying to the authorities in Washington, D.C., who were investigating the suspect. It was all centered in Washington, D.C. It should have been brought for venue in Washington, D.C. It would have been preserved for venue, and it could have gone to trial in Washington, D.C. But Jack Smith, I mean, making a tactical mistake is not any knock on his integrity
Right.
or anything else. The one that made the huge mistake was Merrick Garland.
Of
And
course.
history
Yeah.
will note that he waited over 2 years to appoint a special prosecutor, and he almost gaslighted us. We all saw what happened on January 6th. We saw it on our TVs and on our mobile devices. We knew exactly what happened. We saw that Trump had sat there for over 3 hours, knowing that this marauding was taking place. And he waited to see if it worked out his way or not. He didn't
No,
try to take it down. In the midst of it,
had Doug Jones been the attorney general, it would have happened an hour after the inauguration. I mean, it felt like the deliberation was gaslighting is the exact right word. I don't like using it because I don't 100% know what it means, but I do think that it is. But I feel like that Merrick Garland is the one who let many of us down.
And it's really a pity. I knew him as a young lawyer. He was at the same law firm I was, and we represented Big Tobacco. People say, my goodness, how can you be a criminal defense attorney in all these cases where the government's saying your client is some sleazy tax cheat? And I said, I represented Big Tobacco. Once you represented Big Tobacco. But Merrick and I represented Big Tobacco at the same law firm in Washington, D.C. An incredibly talented lawyer. You look at his appellate decisions when he was the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit, really a legal genius. But I just don't think he was right for that job and for the decisiveness that it took in that moment.
Yeah, it was just too deliberate. Do you think this is like I say, this is a yes or no question?
Go for it, man. Go for it.
If, but it's not really. If Joe Biden were to pardon Donald Trump, what would that do? I mean, what would that do to the way we think about politics, and would it bring us together in a way if that was his intent?
I think there are going to be some preemptive pardons. I don't think that Trump's will be one of them. Trump would hold a speech almost immediately and say he didn't need a pardon. This was a piece of rubbish. This was an insult hurled at him by a guy on the way out.
As Gene Rayburn would say, that was the definitive answer right there. Yeah, there's no question. That is the right answer. But I hear people talking about it as, that would heal our nation. A lot of Republicans are saying that, preemptively pardon Donald Trump so that he wouldn't have to face anything else. Well, the Supreme Court did it already. They already said he's not going to have to face anything.
But Michael, let me be a contrarian. Yeah. Being polarized is not the worst thing in the world. This idea of singing Kumbaya with people who don't have the same values, who don't believe in the rule of law, just want everything to be their way. I want to get along with them. Great. I always tell Mark, I'm the guy who's always on Fox and News Nation and stuff like that. Usually debating these people who are now, I know like half the people in the administration because I've debated them. I didn't debate Hegseth. He didn't have that kind of show. And I deeply resent the people who say he was just a weekend anchor. I was on with a lot of weekend anchors, and I still am, and bless the weekend anchors.
Bless the weekend. I was a weekend correspondent, by the way, for News Nation. And the weekend staff is real staff. And I'm glad. Personally,
we did a bit you can't believe. We did the debate before the debate where I played Waltz and one of the right wingers played Vance, and we went at it for about 8 minutes. And if I do say so myself, I think our debate was a little better than the debate.
I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was.
Playing Waltz, especially me playing Waltz.
That's great. All right. Well, David, I appreciate your time. I could talk to you all day long about this stuff. It's stuff that we both clearly like. And as to your last point, the division is good. It's also the people that say that we've never been this divided. We've always been divided. It's a way we never were, to think that we just had ever a kumbaya moment, whether it was with the fact that we had a civil war in this country or the notion that Bob Dole and George Mitchell got along like best friends on the floor of the Senate in the 80s. It just didn't happen. There's always been division, and you don't want to kowtow to the other side just to try and make a peace that wouldn't last, is my take on that. David Katz, thank you. I cannot wait till the next Thursday. I sit in this seat where Mark has a dentist appointment or something, and we can do this.
You're a great pinch hitter. I'm not just saying that, but you're a great pinch hitter.
Well, you're kind to say it. Thank you so much, David Katz. We thank you for your company. I know the audience loves you because of the comments that we see here. So take care. Hope things are good at home soon, and you're able to get back home. So
thank you for saying that. I hope everyone out there is dealing with the situation, whether in Southern California or not. I know there's problems around the world, not just in Southern California, but we sure are taking it on the chin here.
Man, are we ever. Yep, I agree. All right, take care.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell, you'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.